It feels a shame to be alive, when men so brave are dead, one envies the distinguished dust permitted such a head. The stone that tells defending whom this Spartan put away, what little of him we possessed, in pawn for liberté. The price is great, sublimely paid. Do we deserve a thing that lives like dollars must be piled before we may obtain? Are we that weight sufficient worth, that such enormous pearl as life dissolved but for us in battle's horrid bowl? It may be a renown to live. I think the man who die, those unsustained saviors, present divinity. As a poem by Emily Dickinson, commonly known as It Feels a Shame to Be Alive. Hello and welcome back to the library. And before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to introduce my guest today. He is back, baby, the Book Mac Daddy himself, Noah MacGillivray. Welcome back to the podcast, Noah. How are you doing?
Good, Phil. How are you? Thanks for having me.
It's always great to be here. Now, we're going to cover a topic today that I think every American, for the most part, has some familiarity to. Like, mostly, at least the name should be a little familiar.
Yes.
And in fact, I would venture that most people who know the name Emily Dickinson has read some of her poetry, who at least are English speakers. I was hesitant to first cover her because, well, I personally had a misconception that she lived a pretty boring, reclusive life, which in some ways she did live a boring, reclusive life for sure. However, I think, Noah, you'll be pleasantly surprised about some of the things I've discovered, just reading a little bit about her. Now, do you have any questions? Do you know anything about Emily Dickinson or anything you want to know about her before we move on?
No, I gave her a little bit of a Google just to get a better background, and she's an American poet, and she became famous after her death because her poetry was published.
Yep, that's a lot of what people know about her, which is pretty accurate to say, but there's a lot of mystery behind that itself and self-intention, right? So usually I begin the story by beginning with the person's birth date. However, to tell this tale of Emily Dickinson, one must go back in time around 200 years before her birth. I'm not being facetious. This is because Emily Dickinson's heritage is one of the oldest American heritages to exist. Her patrilineal family dates back to around the 1630s when Nathaniel Dickinson crossed over that large, salty pond that some brainiac decided to call the Atlantic Ocean. And here is where my conspiratorial side comes out. We got to take back calling everything oceans. It's all just one giant pond. And isn't all land masses simply a different scale of island when you think about it? Those scientists were stupid and wrong. Florida will show you when they bring back large polio cases and iron lungs that scientists were always wrong. Great song by a King Gizzard and Wizard, by the way. Iron Lung, I'd recommend it. We'll listen to it afterwards. Okay. But I digress. For Nathaniel Dickinson was originally thought to have immigrated or migrated to the United States with the Winthrop Fleet, which was a group of ships led by John Winthrop, ironically or coincidentally or not, which was also funded by the Massachusetts Bay Company to get more of them good old-fashioned Puritan livestock into New England, most of it into Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Bay Company's original purpose was the funding of colonization of Massachusetts Bay, granted by King Charles I of England. I want to point out now that Nathaniel Dickinson was most likely a Puritan, if not certainly. I don't think this is far off in saying at all, but I probably would compare the Puritans to modern-day followers of Joseph Smith. They were a group of religious zealots with extreme religious views who kept getting kicked out of the lands they settled because, again, they were extremists for the time in the places that they were, and still in a way today, and then settled in a place far away from that government where they're no longer extremists, according to that government, killing the native population in the process. That almost always happens with religious white people coming into the United States, what we know as modern-day United States. That was the colonies back in the day. I say all of this because Nathaniel Dickinson, his wife Anna Gull, who was a widow when they married her, which was also rare at the time, and their 5 children most likely left their place in, I'm going to butcher this because it's a British name, Billingborough, England.
I think that's how I would. Billingborough.
Billingborough. What a name.
That's a cool name. I thought it was Billabong at first, but then I had to read it again.
Billabong is a thing in Australia, which I always read and I go, what the hell does that even mean?
Oh. I thought it was a clothing company.
It is, right?
Billabong? I don't know. It's very surfy vibes. It used to be in PacSun in the U Mall.
Billingborough, England, and then they settled in Wethersfield, located in Harford County, Connecticut today. This happened sometime between the years 1636 and 1638, based on records. This firmly puts them, the family, among one of the first families to migrate during the first period of the Great Migration to the United States, when large groups of English migrants, almost all of them Puritans, moved to the New England colonies. The couple would have 7 more children, creating that lucky dozen. And no, things are not cheaper by the dozen. Steve Martin lied to a whole generation. Yeah. This guy also named 2 of his sons Samuel, which is interesting.
What?
Nathaniel, which is just a weird move. It's a rare move. Usually when you name a kid the same name, your first kid who'd had that name died, but he didn't do that. He just had 2 kids named Samuel.
That's crazy.
At least to my knowledge, there was no records of him, one of the first Samuel dying. And
must have been confusing.
I know, right? What would you call him?
I don't know.
His middle name?
Sam? Sam and Sammy?
And I mean, 5 of his names back in the day were nuts. And some names are still crazy. But these are 5 other of his kids' names. They were Obadiah, Nehemiah, Hezekiah. I'm going with Hezekiah, and Azariah, which I guess Azariah, isn't that a famous? No, Azalea. I'm thinking of Azalea, and that's
Iggy Azalea.
That's 10 years old now, and fucking shows my age. Yeah, Iggy Azalea. I'm so fancy, you already know, right?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's her. And also Azalea is a type of flower, so there you go. Wow, I felt dated there.
Yeah.
I feel like you could just make some shit up and have a name.
I don't think I've heard of any of those names today, but then 2 Sams on that with some of those outlandish names, very cool and uncommon, but 2 Sams is wild.
That's wild. Nathaniel would be the de facto town clerk until he was appointed the actual town clerk, and then an opportunity arose when he and a fellow group of dissenters from the Wethersfield Puritan Church organized a new settlement, and I think it's Hadley, but it could be Hadley, Massachusetts.
Hadley sounds right.
Yeah, it's just south of Amherst. He was, in fact, the first settler of Hadley, and also surveyed the towns of Amherst, Hatfield, and Belchertown, which is where I go after a 6-pack of Francis Conner and a couple of bratwursts. So we are talking literally the OGs of OG white men in the area, right? This guy is the first white settler to live in Amherst, basically. And Emily would pretty much still be heavily influenced by the first settlement in this area. Her and all her, basically how many grandparents there are right there, they all lived in Amherst until whenever she was born. I for one minute wanted to track down the lineage, and I went, after looking at it, this is just not worth my time. I'm just going to go with 10 great-grandparents. I don't know.
Whoa.
Just throwing something out. It's just numbers. They don't matter. They don't exist. Scientists are conspiratorial people as well. Mathematicians are worse.
We made them up.
Yeah, totally. They have literally a whole thing called imaginary numbers that I had to learn when I was in junior year. And they have imaginary numbers. Why wouldn't everything be imaginary? Huh?
I mean, technically, somebody had to imagine it. Somebody had to think of it. So they imagined numbers. So they're all imaginary.
So they're all imaginary, huh? You know that the concept of zero is one of the greatest mathematical inventions of all time? The most Europeans didn't have a concept of zero until Arabs.
I did not know that.
I know. It's pretty wild, huh?
So what was before then? Just negative numbers?
No, there was none either. You had to have a zero. Well, you can have negative numbers because accounting, but like the concept of a zero, like in math, was revolutionized.
So what if they just had no money? They just had no money. I guess money is just not a number thing, I guess. I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so her religious views and the religious views in society still wasn't that far off. How many, hundreds of years later. And honestly, like the region is now pretty different at this point. I would say there's definitely some religion in Western Mass than what we're talking about. But it basically, never moving from a town like that heritage for 150 and plus years is pretty wild to me, right? Like more than that.
Yeah,
that's how her father was the person who invented the town she lived in. Not her father. Her how many ex-grandparent was the person who invented the town.
Talk about some deep-setted roots.
Yeah. So let's wrap a bow on Nathaniel here. He lived in Hadley until his death in 1676, and from what it seems like, it was just old age. However, this was also right in the heart of something called King Philip's War. And no, it wasn't my war. King Philip was a Native American, or at least it was the name that was provided by English speakers to a Native American tribe leader. It was one of the most attritional conflicts in all of North American history, period. It effectively was if you're looking at conflicts in North America, it caused the extermination and eradication of many of the Native American tribes that lived in New England and put it on a perpetual cycle of genocide and just complete extermination. There was no returning from King Philip's War for the Native population. I would suggest listening to Lions Led by Donkeys, which is a history podcast, specifically a war history podcast, if you want to learn more about it. It's horrifying, but it's also like, our, for lack of a better term, cultural history that we need to know more about and that nobody learns in school. In that war, 3 of Nathaniel's sons die. So that was another interesting fact that, people thought he died from that war, but it's almost certain that he didn't. Right? So any questions about King Philip's War or anything of that sort? Because it's not just in Massachusetts, and it's just not one tribe.
Throughout New England.
It's the Narragansetts where we get the beer, right? Like they were basically exterminated afterwards. It's all throughout the New England. The Abenaki were involved as well. Like I can't summarize it as well as what they did in Lions Led by Donkeys and Joe Kasabian did, but like it's fascinating and horrifying at the same time. The population of the white population too did not bounce back from that war until after the Revolutionary War. Like that's how attritional it was.
Whoa.
And this is the early 1600s, and we're talking 1700s here, late almost 1800s.
Yeah, so that was like a big deal. Bloodshed on both sides.
Yeah. So he's definitely directly involved in that. Because we need to now jump 137 years and talk about Emily's grandfather. Let's just pretend that every Dickinson in the area had some kind of highly influential status because, well, if you are the first white dude to inhabit a town that you created before and then after a genocidal war, your descendants are probably going to be pretty well off, right? Like, it's just kind of how facts work. And we will eventually get to an end result to the modern day as an example of who the descendant of Nate Dogg here was. Honestly, I didn't write this down. I forgot to add it to the script, and I realized that afterwards. Do you want to guess a modern day descendant of Emily Dickinson's great grandfather? It's not. His last name isn't Dickinson, and I'm going to give you
a hint,
a couple hints. Billionaire, not really political. One of the most famous billionaires in the world.
Bezos? Is Bezos political?
He's not, but it's not Jeff Bezos.
He's very rich.
His last name is spelled similarly to an all-you-can-eat place, but it's not pronounced that.
I don't know of any all-you-can-eat places besides Grandpa's Buffet in Essex. Shout out to the stuffed shells and.
Well, you said it.
What?
Grand Buffet.
Grand Buffet?
It's Warren Buffett.
Oh, no way!
Yeah. Yeah, Emily Dickinson and Warren Buffett have some sort of heritage combined, which is wild.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like if you think that Warren Buffett was like a self-made man, like
he has some he has some big-setted roots in there.
Yeah, definitely in America.
Yeah.
Right. So
very cool.
So Emily's grandfather, Samuel Fowler Dickinson, built something called a home called the Homestead, which is the first brick building in town. Us being in a brick building right now, it's kind of important, right? It was in 1813. The following year, he founds Amherst Academy, which becomes the leading preparatory school in Western Massachusetts, which prep schools in Massachusetts are excellent in regards to education, but pretty synonymous. In 1821, he co-founded Amherst Collegiate Institution with this guy, again, name alert, Zephaniah Swift Moore. Today, we know this place as Amherst College.
That's pretty sweet. So he not only did he like make a town, but he also like built schools.
Yeah,
that are still here.
To his demise too, unfortunately, because Samuel Fowler Dickinson. We'll get to this, but he married, of course, to Lucretia Gunn, and this wouldn't be America if we didn't talk about guns at least once. And of course, they did have a son. His name was Edward Dickinson, of course. Teddy Dick would marry Emily Norcross. Now, a really quick search showed that the Norcross family was also one of the oldest families in the colonies as well. They came, from what I can see, at least as early as the 1690s. So again, this is a level of ingrained to the region that you could possibly believe if that we're talking about, right? We are going to discuss her family life, specifically her parents, in depth shortly. But for now, let's leave it as Emily and Edward would have 3 children. By her, I meant Emily Dickinson, not Emily, her mother, which is really weird to name your daughter the same name. But
yeah, well, it happens with the 2 Samuels.
Yeah, I mean, I guess names were just kind of whatever they wanted to be back then. I guess it's the same feeling now. Why not? Like we could just name anything we want in America, which is funny.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I don't think there's really any laws in this country that says you can't name your name anything else.
I think I saw somebody name their baby pregame. I don't know if it was a joke and I'm just falling for something on the internet, but
I mean, freaking Elon Musk named a kid with letters that don't exist. He literally scarred his kid for the rest of his life. Like, I don't know what to tell him. But yeah, you can name your kid like swear words in this country. In France, it's illegal to like name your kid that. In some ways, like it kind of makes sense. You shouldn't name your kid something that's horrendously offensive.
Yeah, probably not the best move.
No, it's America. Don't catch you slipping up, right?
Yeah, you never know what'll happen.
No, you don't. So, like, for now, let's leave it as Emily and Edward would have 3 children. Austin was the first, the only boy. Lavinia, the youngest, and Emily Elizabeth Dickinson right in between. So we finally got our protagonist. 3 pages in. She was born on December 10th, 1830, and there we have it. 1,000 words in, she's got a birth date. Now, I will add here that Emily will be close to her siblings all her life, and this will be important later on, but know that her family life is relatively happy and pretty privileged for a person living in the earlier half of the 19th century. And just her siblings are pretty close. She's not very close to her mother and her father. The Dickinsons would live in the house called the Homestead for her very early years, and in fact only moved back home a few months before she was born, actually. We're talking old school colonial homes here that can house like a baker dozen's children, after all. However, Samuel Fowler and Lucretia Gunn moved a few years after Lavinia was born, ending up in Ohio, so her grandparents, because of troubling finances from the town of Amherst that was caused by financial difficulties from the schools that he developed, and he just ran out of expenses and probably incurred too much debt, which makes me believe that they were, they had to be pretty troubled if they moved into Ohio in the 1830s. Ohio was...
It's not a short travel, I think, back then.
No, it was basically the frontier back then.
Right.
Ohio was just becoming a state. So they were moving out as far west as they possibly could. The homestead was sold, but Emily, and co. would remain in the homestead as tenants for 7 more years. So whoever bought it rented that place out to them. Emily's father, Edward, was much better off than his father was financially. He became a lawyer and was appointed treasurer of Amherst College. There's 10 people in this town, it feels like. In fact, Edward would serve in the Massachusetts House of Representatives from 1836 to 1838. He would be a state senator from 1842 to 1843, represent Massachusetts' 10th Congressional District in the 33rd Congress from 1853 to 1855, and then serve again in the House in 1873, which he was only elected there because they needed to get a railroad, and he was an important person and people respected. The Dickinsons moved from the homestead to a new house on North Pleasant Street, and in the same year, when she was around 9 years old, Emily and her sister would enter school together, the Amherst Academy that her grandfather started.
Nice.
Yeah, I know. That is, how much more connected can you get? Amherst Academy was considered one of the best schools in Western Massachusetts at the time. So,
yeah, I bet they didn't have too much trouble getting in there.
Both Dickinson girls were very well educated for girls at this point in time in general. The era of 1840 was not really fertile ground for educating young girls. Their education was not uncommon, though, for people in Massachusetts and generally in Amherst, very much specifically. Amherst had a pretty high education rate. One thing you have to give Massachusetts is that it has always been a state that values their education comparatively to the rest of the United States, for sure. In fact, it seems like there are a couple of regions found, let's say in the Northeast and the Pacific West and spots around the Great Lakes that still value it more than others. Hypothetically speaking, of course. In terms of writing, this was the point in American literature history where Ralph Waldo Emerson's first book of collected poems was very influential, and Emily Dickinson received this book, and she loved them. She also enjoyed the writings of William Wordsworth, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, specifically his book Kavanaugh, which she had to her brother smuggled into the home because the father would have not approved of it and gotten rid of it, and the works of Charlotte Bronte. So a lot of English-specific writers, not just English language, but English. And of course, she was influenced by both William Shakespeare, and we cannot disregard or discount the Bible at all. After all, she was in New England in the 1800s. Pretty much everybody at this point in history in this region loved and worshipped the Bible. Not so much anymore.
No, not as a common thing, but that's what makes it great. That's what makes it cool.
Yeah, I think so too. At the age of 17, at least we don't have to worry about draconian laws that are based on the Bible. The Bible. At the age of 17, great book. I don't know if you read any of the Bible. Some of it is absolutely captivating. Certain versions specifically. The King James, wonderfully written.
I have not read the Bible through and through, but I talked about it with my mom today, and a lot of those stories can translate into real life, and it is very, you said captivating, and yeah, I bet you it is. I bet you there's a reason why people follow it so religiously.
Because I guess see what you did there, or heard, I guess. Yeah, no. How do I put it? There are definitely reasons why you should extrapolate certain laws from the Bible. However, if you follow the Bible religiously, you probably need to understand that most of the shit that happened in the Bible was because it was a different time. Yeah. I wouldn't give the sons of, I think it was Daniel, the right to just abduct whatever women from a different tribe because they partook in a war with the other 12 tribes and they don't have enough women, for example. that seems like rape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't do that. You'd get in trouble for doing that.
Yeah, that's literally abduction.
Yeah.
And it's in the Bible. I might be wrong with the specific tribe, but,
Yeah, I think there's a few amount of things in the Bible that are not so cool, I have also heard.
Not hip.
Yeah, not hip. Not with the times.
Not
Definitely
with the times. So at the age of 17, her time at the Amherst Academy ended, where a lot of her education focused on both science and religion based on one influential teacher, which I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense nowadays since religious schools refuse to teach the factual science, like a lot of them in certain areas. But I went to a Catholic school all my life, and, our AP bio professor at my school was a nun, and she didn't let facts get in the way of her religion, is the best way I would put it. She taught AP bio in the way you should teach it, through facts. Anyway, Dickinson goes to Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, which is now Mount Holyoke College. It's one of the last all-female and all-women's colleges in the country. Her parents, specifically her father, held Calvinist beliefs. Her father would actually fall victim of the Second Great Awakening. And I hold that because, there were a couple of Great Awakenings throughout the world. But he would raise his children to share these, what I would categorize as extremist beliefs again. Calvinism is pretty extreme, and it doesn't exist much anymore. But
I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar.
It's one of those religions that believe that only a certain number of people are going to go to heaven, that your life is already predetermined before you're born. So whatever happens to you is already,
it's already planned out.
It's already planned out. Who gives a shit? Like, kind of thing. The Swiss loved it for some reason, but it kind of makes sense if you know the Swiss.
That's a pretty interesting belief. Like it's already set in stone. Nothing you can do to change it.
Yeah, there's a lot of religions that were based off of that originated from the United States too. And, he would raise his children to share these beliefs, similar to the ones that the majority of the Supreme Court justices now hold, because the separation of church and state has all of a sudden been merged into a Venn diagram that looks more like two circles on top of each other. But I digress, because Emily would also start to question her religious beliefs in college, and she would have these religious belief questioning throughout the rest of her life, and it really does show in her literature, though she definitely was a Christian, absolutely. But you will, if you read her poetry, like many others do, there's a lot of doubt. Even though the Mount Holyoke Female Cemetery was incredibly religious, she would attend it for 1 year. She still learned a lot of scientific concepts. This was a school in Massachusetts, after all. And this is what I think really important to understand. When science directly contradicts with religion, there still needs to be some kind of reckoning, right? And this is what she had. The options are a rejection of faith, an understanding that faith can fill the gaps that science cannot answer, or a rejection of scientific facts. That's a simple way of putting it, but, that's kind of how I view it. And Emily's poetry will reflect this pretty succinctly, whether she intended to portray those beliefs or not. So, after a year at Mount Holyoke, Dickinson moves back into her father's home on North Pleasant Street. There she meets Benjamin Newton, a young lawyer working under her father's office. This is a very clear example of the kind of companionship she held. I wouldn't say this is a misunderstanding of Emily Dickinson, but something I learned about her, and we touched upon it, was she was a bit of a hermit, which after learning about her is both fair and unfair to describe her in some ways. I say societally, she was pretty mixed up through the pressures and with the personal institution that just made her a homebody, which is fine. And honestly, like, in so many ways, she probably accepted today, she probably just couldn't handle the stress and obligations not only women had at that point, but all people without serious trust funds have to get work and welfare. Like, she goes to, well, she didn't go to work. She didn't have to work, but you would go to work, you come home, decompress, and that's it. Like, right? Like, you don't really want to deal with anything else. And that's a homebody. I wouldn't call you a hermit,
Yeah, no, there are plenty of people that do that stuff nowadays, especially with all the distractions we have with technology.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call them hermits.
We all know people like Emily Dickinson in a way. She's one of America's foundational writers, but she's also like one of America's like foundational like people in the sense that societally like I get it. Like I kind of get it. I mean, I'm not the one of these people, but candidly, like reading her background, she's not as unique as people want to put her, which is unfortunate. America's a beautiful place. Everybody should get out and like socialize, but we have a lot of these crazy pressures, and we were talking a little bit about it, and I don't want to get into like too much of the politics, but like we just don't have like an area where it's acceptable to just like chill a lot of times. So just be you without somebody else bothering you. So besides that, nowadays it's even worse with having to make money, but that's a different story. Emily Dickinson though never does marry, which I mean in the year 2025 is way more common, but for her it's not very common at all. It must feel futuristic even living to this day that like she never does this. Side note, anybody who says we live in the worst timeline, because like I wrote this meaning like that this futuristic timelines or other timelines exist, I think they need to shut the fuck up. Right? Like I was chatting with somebody else about this. Like, no, we're not living in the worst timeline, period. If you actually believe in that, like I don't really want to talk about different timelines because realistically, like you don't have access to that knowledge. And like
no, it's made up.
It's made, and like there's no proof.
It's not the one we're living.
And it's not. Yeah, so just work in the timeline you have because otherwise that's a cop out. Yeah. In my view.
I could agree with that.
You could have never existed. You could have already been dead. You could be literally living in torture. It sucks, but you need to figure it out. All right, I digress. A lot is said about Emily Dickinson and her self-seclusion. And to a certain extent, again, this is an accurate thing about her. She was a bit of a homebody, but there is also a bit more to it than that. I introduced this topic not to disprove it, but to state that she didn't totally self-isolate. When she was around 18, she befriended this person, like I said, Benjamin Franklin Newton, who worked in her father's law office as a lawyer. They would never become more than friends, and to my understanding, he was a little older than her as well. But before Benny Boy, she also befriended the Amherst Academy's principal, Leonard Humphrey. These two older gentlemen would have an impact on her life in many ways, from being tutors to having a patriarchal influence on her outside her father. But like all of us, both these men died. We all died. First, Humphrey died of a brain congestion, which is just an old-timey way of, I have no clue what a brain congestion was.
He got boogers in his brain.
This was Emily had to say about his death, writing a couple years afterwards. Quote, "Some of my friends are gone and some of my friends are sleeping in the churchyard sleep. The hour of evening is sad. It was once my study hour. My master has gone to rest, and the open leaf of the book and the scholar at school alone make the tears come, and I cannot brush them away. I would not if I could, for they are the only tribute I can pay the departed Humphrey," unquote. Yeah, a lot of like emo depression shit there, but like, she doesn't only write emotionally dark things, but a lot of what she writes is remembered for being that. In 1853, 3 years after Leo passes, Benny Boy does die. This death was also very sudden, dying of tuberculosis, which is back, baby. TB is fucking back. There's 3 cases in Maine alone.
Wow.
We brought it back. Woo! Woo!
Oh, my gosh.
I know, right? We did it. We fucking did it.
Yay.
We brought TB back. Ben Newton is believed to be the person who introduced Emily Dickinson to Wordsworth writings and other writings as well. These deaths will also have a profound impact on her poetry later on in life. Like many poets, Emily will write quite a lot about death. Arguably, her most famous poem starts with the line, quote, "Because I could not stop for death," unquote, which I will recite as the last bit of this script. I already mentioned that Emily's father was a representative from Massachusetts between the years of 1853 to 1855. right? So he was in Washington, D.C. He was a Whig Party member, if you were curious at all.
Wow, nice.
Does that mean anything to you, the Whig Party, WHIG?
Politicians that wore the white wigs back in the day and like powdered their face and...
I mean, yeah, kind of. Not off, but Whig is spelled WHIG, not WIG. It stems from the English one, right? The Whigs were a party that dissolved pretty much in the mid 1850s, and I think 1852 was pretty much the last time the Whigs won any election nationally. So like he literally squeezed in there. They dissolved as soon as he was in there, like basically, and there was no more Whigs after him. The Whigs were interesting. They were one of the parties. They were against the Democratic Republicans, or that end up being the Democrats, and they were anti-slavery. They just couldn't get their shit together. The fall of the Whig Party is one of the most pathetic falls of a political party you can think of. Edward Dickinson was a smart man and knew that he wouldn't be living in the nation's capital for very long because he was a Whig. So the last year he was nationally elected. He was in this position, So 1855, Emily, her sister Lavinia, and her mother, also Emily, traveled down to Washington, District of Columbia, on a sightseeing journey. This would be Emily's longest trip of her life, western Massachusetts to Washington, D.C., which is now like a 7-hour drive without traffic. I was curious what Emily and company would have seen. D.C. in 1855 was nothing like it is today. Namely, it's filled with, National Guardsmen picking up trash for a wannabe dictator. But also, the only two buildings that I found that we would recognize on the National Mall that existed were the White House and the U.S. Capitol building before any of the expansion of the current rotunda. So Washington Monument, not there. Yeah. Obviously the Lincoln Memorial, not there. Right. Most of the museums, not there. It would have been an interesting place to see at the time. Have you been to D.C. before?
Unfortunately, no, I have not been to D.C. I had an opportunity to go in middle school, but I was like, nah, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay home and play video games. I had better things to do, apparently.
Fair enough. I heard it's beautiful this time of year, with a bunch of National Guardsmen hanging around.
Oh, yeah. What a sight to see.
I mean, I would love to see it. I would love to. I mean, not in other than a morbid curiosity way.
Right, exactly. Just be like, oh.
Like, holy shit, this is what we're living in right now.
Yep. This is our nation's capital.
I mean, we're getting political, but I did read online, like, somebody writing an ironic post, like, everybody in Chicago, because they're sending the National Guard to Chicago soon, should be happy that they're coming to Chicago. Washington, D.C. has never been cleaner in her life because they just hired the most expensive cleaning service.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. It's
they better do a good job at it, too.
They have to.
Yeah.
Oh, it's dark to laugh at that. We're going to get into fucking something dark because slavery in the 1850s was still very much legal, though the actual selling and trading of slaves was prohibited in 1850 itself, in Washington, D.C. only. That just got pushed out to Virginia, specifically the city of Alexandria, where much of the actual slave trading in that region occurred. After their return to Amherst, with the Dickinson's sisters and mother stopping briefly in Philadelphia on the way back, Emily's father was able to increase his status and his finances enough to purchase back the homestead as his law career truly became fruitful, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The homestead will be the home of Emily Dickinson until the rest of her life. One addition to the homestead that was erected was a conservatory. For Emily, Dickinson's hobbies included the cultivation and caring of plants exotic to Massachusetts. And yes, this is where I finally put the words Dickinson and erection in the same sentence and still find it funny. Because if you really want to stretch this joke out, Dickinson cultivation of her exotic plants in her newly erected glass box can really do it for me. And here we are. It's halfway through the script. We're halfway through. We did it.
Nice.
The first immature joke about her last name.
Nice.
Have you seen Letterkenny?
Yes.
His name is Dickinson, but everyone calls him Dickskin.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's okay.
What a great show.
What a great show.
What a great show.
Just so fast, so quick.
Jared Kesso. He does great stuff.
Going back to a more mature topic, while she was alive, Emily would much more be known as a gardener than a poet. However, she never really kept a lot of gardening books or plant lists. She did assemble a collection of pressed plants, which contained 442 pressed flower specimens, and she classified them and labeled them using the Linnaeum system. That's like the system that uses all the Latin words for certain plant objects or animals. Her love of flowers was lifelong, starting when she was learning about botany from when she was in the Amherst Academy at the age of 9 until up to her death, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Got to do something when you're living at home.
And I guess that might be why she liked to go home so much, to get lost in her plants.
I mean, it's a great hobby.
Yeah.
What else are you going to do?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
She read, she sent letters, and she pressed plants. 1855 would also mark another important moment in Emily's life. This is when she began to write poetry in earnest. In fact, her poetry writing, the majority of it, not only exclusively, but the vast majority of it, only really happened in a decade between 1855 and 1865.
She just popped off.
Yep. It's not the only time we've seen this. We had
right.
The last person we chatted about was the same thing, right?
Right. And even Arthur Rimbaud.
Yeah.
I think he had He had a very short time writing.
Yeah, exactly. I find it intriguing.
Pattern. Yeah, there's a pattern here.
Yeah, I find it intriguing. I didn't expect. This might be the pattern from here on end.
It could. Yeah.
The following year, Austin Dickinson, so her brother, also marries somebody that he's been courting for 6 years. So, in 1856, Austin Dickinson marries Susan Huntington Gilbert, which Emily has been friends with the entire time as well. They move into a building called the Evergreens, literally right next door to Emily and her parents. The Evergreens would be a meeting place for Amherst society, a lively house where people would congregate and talk intellectual shit, which was very different to the homestead, especially later in Emily's life. However, it would consistently be this place to congregate, and Emily would go to it from time to time as well. So it goes back to this whole thing that, yeah, she was somebody who stayed at home most of the time.
But there's stuff going on.
Yeah, why would you leave if you have
everything
all
you
of
need?
Society next door?
Right.
Susan would probably be considered Emily's best friend for her life, basically. And in fact, they were probably more than just close friends. More on this later, Noah.
Okay.
So in 1858, while at a house visit at her brother's home next door, Emily is actually introduced to a literary editor and critic named Samuel Bowles. It's Bowles. When I first read this, I thought it was Sam Bowles.
Yeah.
Or Sam Bowles, but it's probably Bowles. I don't know. Bowles or Bowles. I'm going to call him Bowles because I'm not sure.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. Why not? Sorry if I'm ruining somebody's, great-great-great-grandfather's name, but Sam Bowles, or Sammy Bowles, was the editor of the Springfield newspaper. It was called the Daily Republican. They would begin their correspondence shortly after their meeting. It would be with this introduction that Sammy Bowles, where most of her poems were published while she was actually alive. Now, Emily may have published a poem and a Valentine letter prior to the first time that I found. Like, there's some evidence that she did at least have one poem and one Valentine letter prior. In fact, most likely she did. The Valentine letter was while she was actually attending Mount Holyoke. The other one might have been published by the Daily Republican, also called a Valentine confusingly, in 1852 before the meeting. But the first poem that is of worth that was published after meeting of Sammy Bowles would be in 1858, and the bulk of her publishing would occur afterwards. Something to note is that much of Emily's poems don't have titles, actually. She didn't really title them. The title is simply just the first line that was put onto the poem afterwards, or certain poems were given titles by the editor or somebody else. So sometimes you will see the title, and sometimes it's just the number based on where it is in the collection. My personal reading of it was the number based off how it was organized in her collection. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that does make sense. It's interesting that it's interesting that she didn't give titles to her poems. Like, I wonder why she didn't feel the need to do that, and kind of like left it up to maybe she did leave it up to the editor, maybe she didn't, or maybe the editor was just like, we need to like organize this somehow. But I think that's it's kind of interesting, and I don't know. It makes sense though. I get it.
It is a unique factor in like some authors did it before, but I don't know. I don't think she's the first, but it's unique in its way.
For sure.
So this is a poem she published after meeting Bowles, and the first, well, you'll know what the first line is. And this is the first poem that she published in the Springfield Republican. Nobody knows this little rose. It might a pilgrim be. Did I not take it from the ways and lift it up to thee? Only a bee will miss it, only a butterfly, hastening from far journey on its breast to lie. Only a bird will wonder, only a breeze will sigh. Ah, little rose, how easy for such as thee to die. It's a simple poem. It's about a rose. A lot of her poems are simple, and we're not going to get into too many of her in-depth ones. A lot of them are introspective, but, it's always unique and interesting to understand which one was the first, or one of the firsts. Any questions? Because we're going to start getting into something more historically significant.
No, I think I'm pretty squared away. Pretty good.
So in 1861, the Civil War breaks out. Well, we get it. We broke it out.
Whoa.
The war, of course, affected all of American society, but to say it directly affected Emily outside the knowledge that hundreds of thousands of Union men and hundreds of thousands of traitors to the Union were dying over the evils of slavery, I don't think there's much that affected her at all. The Civil War would be a very common theme, however, that pops up in Emily's writing. The introductory poem was one of the great examples of poems that she wrote about the Civil War. So, like, a lot of her poems are about civil wars. A lot of them are death. There's a lot about love. There's a lot about religion or the lack of them. And then there's just a lot of everything else. And like this work, almost all of it wasn't published decades after her death, right? Like that's the most unique part. Even the Civil War poems. Let's talk about her publications when she was alive, though. Because something everyone is taught in the United States, or the U.S. of motherfucking A, is that the Dickinson's poetry involves a lot of slant rhymes or rhyming schemes with words that really shouldn't rhyme or on paper look like they do, but because English is one of those slapdash put together by spit and bad dental practices languages is in a world where they just don't. As a true sign of how nerdy I am, Noah, I follow the Merriam-Webster's Instagram account because, of course, I do.
Right on.
And they
teach their own.
Yeah, teach their own. And they recently posted something similar to this. Words that do not rhyme. Through, cough, though, rough, bow. Meanwhile, things that do rhyme. Pony and baloney. So, fun. Cool stuff. Because of this use of slant rhymes, though, her use, the dozen or so poems she did publish in her lifetime were often rewritten and heavily edited. Like, it's safe to say anybody who listens to hip-hop or rap understands the concept of a slant rhyme. Just look up a clip of Anderson Cooper interviewing Eminem and asks him to rhyme the word orange. It's pretty impressive. This was not a common thing in her days, however, and people changed her writing for a long time to accommodate their norms. Here's an example of a poem published in the Springfield Republican that was heavily edited. The original wording was, I taste a liquor never brewed, from tankards scooped in pearl. Not all Frankfurt berries yield such alcohol. Right? It would be alcohol or with pearl, but that's the rhyme that's supposed to happen. I mean, trust me, I feel like somebody from Baltimore could make that work based off the accents out of Baltimore. Here's the Republican version in the Springfield Republican. I taste a liquor never brewed from tankards scooped in pearl. Not Frankfurt berries yield the sense, such a delicious whirl. So, like, yeah. And it happens all throughout her life that she's doing this, and for much longer than you expect, that the original publications don't occur. Do you get slant rhymes? I assume you do.
Yeah, Eminem does it all the time. I've been big into Eminem recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of his stuff, I'm like, how does he even think of it? But I guess that's what a creative genius does.
I mean, a lot of hip-hop artists, rap artists do it. Like, Eminem is not exclusive. I just feel like the extreme example of Orange is out there for that reason.
Well, I think rap is a good, parallel to poetry because it technically is.
I love that you said that.
Yeah.
People who shit on poetry but love hip-hop or rap, like, don't understand where rap comes from.
They I feel like they go hand in hand a bit.
They definitely do. I 100% agree with you on that. I feel like modern day rap is going to be known as some of the poetry that comes out and like studied. Personally, I genuinely believe that, but who knows what kind of hip hop and poetry and rap is actually going to be studied, and that's why you should always kind of be careful what you say.
It's true.
Or right. Beyond slant rhymes, though, Dickinson and her poetry is also known for its syntax. Here's the Poetry Foundation's description of her syntax in her own writing. Quote, by the late 1850s, the poems as well as the letters begin to speak with their own direct voice. They shift from the early lush language of the 1850s Valentines to their signature economy of expression. The poems dated to 1858 already carry the familiar metric pattern of the hymn. The alternating 4-beat, 3-beat lines are marked by a brevity in turn reinforced by Dickinson's syntax. Her poems followed both the cadence and the rhythm of the hymn form she adopted. This form was fertile ground or fertile soil for her poetic exploration. Through its faithful predictability, she could play content off against form, while certain lines accord with their place in the hymn, either leading the reader to the next line or drawing a thought to its conclusion. The poems are as likely to upend the structure so that the expected moment of cadence includes the words that speak the greatest ambiguity. Yeah, basically, what this is saying, and to summarize it, is that she learned her own certain syntax. Ooh. And she kept with it. I read that the cadence of Emily's works can also be sung in the same cadence as a song called The Yellow Rose of Texas, which is a traditional song that dates back in the 1850s, originating in the American West. So that's interesting, like to think that like she picked up a very old song and maybe she was influenced by it. I mean, it's right around the same age. The Republican, which is the obviously the publication, isn't the only place she sent her poems. She swung for the fences and sends 4 poems to the Atlantic Monthly. I don't think the Atlantic was the same publishing company that it was now. If you get something published in the Atlantic, you've not only made it, that is the creme de la creme in the United States. Noah, I'll let you know. If I can get ever anything published in the Atlantic, I know that I did a really good job.
You're there.
You've made it. She was advised by the editor of The Atlantic to change her imperfect rhymes to be more commercially viable. Instead, she didn't publish them. She just chose not to. However, yeah, which is great, I think. She does start, in spite of all this, a correspondence with The Atlantic's editor that would last for 20 years. This person's name is Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and he will play a major role in her life later. Right? Any questions about her style and anything of that sort?
No questions, but it's interesting how it's like 3-beat, 4-beat type of writing.
She's not the first person to obviously to create this, but it's honestly one of the reasons why people admire her so much, because when I read it, I was like, oh, this is like kind of easy to understand, but like it's easy to understand because you can predictably understand what she's trying to do. I find that, in modern age, when you write poetry, everything is free form and free verse, which is just like you don't have a cadence and you don't have that. That's generalization. One of the most difficult things that you can do is write an excellent poem in a traditional standard, and people don't understand that you actually even did that, right? Like, if you can write a poem that's a sonnet that people can't identify as a sonnet immediately, that is an exceptionally talented writer. In 1864, the last of her poems would be published, for a little bit at least. These were a handful of poems about the war that was happening to help fundraise for medical care for Union soldiers, because, of course they were. She was from Massachusetts, and she was on the side of winners. It wouldn't be again until the 1870s, or a decade or so after she stops writing legitimately, where her poems were introduced to somebody named Helen Hunt Jackson, who went to the same academy as Dickinson when they were little girls. She convinced Emily Dickinson to publish at least one last poem, the first line being "Success is counted sweetest," which was published anonymously in a volume called A Mask of Poems. A Mask of Poets, not poems. Just because she didn't publish didn't mean she wasn't a prolific writer either. This is quoting Emily Dickinson's museum online. Quote, "By the time Dickinson turned 35, she had composed more than 1,100 concise, powerful lyrics that astutely examine pain, grief, joy, love, nature, and art. She recorded about 800 of these poems in small, handmade booklets, which are now called fascicles, very private publications, and she shared them with no one," unquote. And I think that this kind of answers one of the questions why she didn't want to publish anymore. I believe a lot of these poems were her private reflections, and she didn't feel comfortable sharing with them to anybody while she was alive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's a reason why she didn't do that. If she was proud of them and thought they were good, she probably would have shared them.
I mean, she could still be proud of them. She might still be good, but she doesn't have to. If they're private reflections, why would you share them?
Why share them? Yeah.
Not every one of 1,100 or 800 poems are going to be excellent. We'll get to that point later. In 1864, Emily would make her last trip outside of the homestead. This was to see an eye specialist in Boston. She would make a couple of these, but by the time of 1864 ends, she no longer leaves Amherst for the next 22 years of her life. Now, we've mentioned her sister-in-law, Susan, right? Remember her and that relationship?
Yes.
Okay. Emily said of Susan that, quote, "With the exception of Shakespeare, you have told me of more knowledge than anyone living," unquote, which is confusing because Shakespeare wasn't living at all during the time. So she told her more knowledge than anybody else. And Shakespeare might have told her more knowledge of a dead person. She referred to her as her most beloved friend, influence, muse, and advisor. She wrote over 300 letters to her and sent her around 200 poems of her own self that some of them were never rewritten. There were also some strong sexual undertones in her writings to her sister-in-law. There are some who are historians who speculate that they had some kind of a romantic relationship. Susan would also grow more and more distressed and disinterested from Austin, her husband, to the point where he started to promote the notion that she was just a cruel woman, and he would share that to others. I don't know what happened here, but there was some serious drama in this family relationship.
No details on that? Like no facts or anything that you could find?
There's some facts, there's some letters, but we'll figure out one of the reasons why we don't know a lot about Emily Dickinson's thought process pretty shortly. It's pretty interesting what she does.
All right.
The drama just got steamier when a person named Mabel Loomis Todd, one of Emily's friends, got into the mix. For she began to have an affair with Austin Dickinson.
Oh.
Now, I can't say for certain if Emily had sexual relationships or relations with Susan, her brother's wife. Maybe this happened. I've personally speculated a handful of times about people's sexuality, and there is some evidence to this one, again, but this is mostly maybe. What's for certain is that this relationship has sprung some creative interpretations in both books and films based on this affair. The reason why I say this might have happened rather than a definitive is because there isn't a ton more proof than words on letters, and people simply wrote more intimately 150 years ago. We can make direct tangent relationships with other historical figures who were gay, like that we've covered, like Archibald Butt, based on who he hung out with, who they slept together with, who they lived with, where they resided, why they resided there, and other interpretations of all those people. With Emily, it's very little of that available. We also talk about another relationship in her life shortly after this that might also disprove any of this segment. So this could be complete nonsense. Still, here's an example of a letter of a homoerotic overtones from Emily to Susan. Quote, "Susie, will you indeed come home next Saturday and be my own again and kiss me as you used to? I hope for you so much and feel so eager for you. Feel that I cannot wait. Feel that now I must have you. That the expectation once more to see your face again makes me feel hot and feverish, and my heart beats so fast. My darling, so near I seem to you that I disdain this pen and wait for warmer language." Unquote.
That is pretty hot and steamy. But granted, with what you said, they wrote a little bit more intimate back then because that was a big form of how you got in contact with somebody. But that, on the surface of it, seems very, very, very intimate.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily would continue to write after 65, like we said, right? But this was a lot less fruitful and very, very disorganized. She stopped writing things in booklets, and many poems were just written on scraps of paper. This honestly could be as easy of an explanation as she just had other priorities. I don't know why. What is certain is that the older Emily got, the more reclusive she became. That's for certain. Again, this is also not abnormal.
No.
Not at all.
No.
Right? She kept to her home and her flowers mostly. She became more reclusive when her father died as well. In Boston, he had to go to a hospital or get medical care in 1874. She and her sister then would maintain the homestead and nurse her invalid mother from there on. But to say that she was completely reclusive was also inaccurate. Again, her brother and her sister-in-law owned the Evergreens, where for many years that was the social place to go.
That was the place to be.
Yeah,
and they're right next door,
right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons why this is inaccurate is she began a romantic affair with the Honorable Judge Otis Phillips Lord, who was a friend of her father's. The Lords, both the Honorable Judge Otis Phillips Lord and his wife, were frequent guests in the homestead while his father was alive. And once he became a widower, so the Honorable Judge Otis Phillips Lord, once his wife died, he had an affair with Emily Dickinson, most likely, almost certainly. He did live in Salem, Massachusetts, however, and though drafts of letters show she considered marrying him, well, she wasn't going to move out of the homestead. I think this affair may have started before her father's death as well, but the timing here is a little icky, if that's one way to put it. 1882, her mother finally passes away after nearly 8 years of being taken care of her daughters. My understanding is that Emily and her mother didn't have a great relationship again. It was somewhat chilly, if not hostile. In 1884, on June 14th to be specific, Emily finally becomes very sick. She suffers her first attack of Bright's disease, which is an inflammation of the kidneys. We don't call it Bright's disease anymore. It's something different.
I read this on Google, Bright's disease.
I don't remember what it's called, but it's something completely different. I don't know. It's the old-timey way of putting it. I also thought Bright's disease was what Jonah Lomu died of, but he died of something similar. It was another different inflammation of the kidney. His was chronic.
Interesting.
Yeah, Jonah Lomu died of a pretty serious kidney disease, right?
Side note, kidneys are the unsung hero of the body. I hope
absolutely.
Everyone knows that. They kind of conduct a lot of stuff going on, and yeah, they're very important.
Emily would suffer from Bright's disease for the next 2 years of her life. she finally passes away of this disease on May 15th, 1886. Now, we're not done yet. We have to talk about her publication.
Yes.
Do you have any questions so far?
I don't think I have any questions. I think I'm learning lots and taking it in. Bit unfortunate she was kind of classified as like a recluse or a hermit, but
and like in some ways she was, but
she had everything she needed. So
yeah, I don't think it's very fair.
Yeah, I agree.
Before her passing, Emily asked of her sister Lavinia to burn her letters and her correspondence. Whatever was in those letters, Emily did not want the world knowing. However, she did not mention the 40-odd notebooks and loose papers locked in a chest. It was while burning the letters, around 4 years after her passing, did she stumble upon these manuscripts. Lavinia first asks her friend Mabel Loomis Todd, her brother's lover, to help publish them. With the help of Higginson, the Atlantic's editor, Mabel Todd gets the first 3 volumes of Emily Dickinson's works published. A total of 115 poems that simply was just titled, the book was called The Poems, in November of 1890, around 4 years after her death. It was a critical and financial success. Also, Mabel Todd and the editor Higginson claimed that the essential edits that occurred needed to happen, but some of the poems in this volume would be completely unrecognizable from its originals. Of course, there was family drama in all of this. I believe it started before the publication of her posthumous collection, but effectively Emily Dickinson's manuscripts were divided amongst the Todd coalition and the Dickinson household. The manuscripts that the Todd coalition had would be kept in their possession for the next 60 years.
Whoa.
Furthermore, Lavinia may have been obligated to burn her sister's correspondence, but Mabel Loomis Todd felt no obligation, especially since the letters that were burnt were letters that Emily received, not the ones she sent. Both Todd and Higginson recognized the significance of these letters after her poems became critically acclaimed, many of which contained other poems written for just that recipient, and they began collecting as many letters as they can. The first edition of Letters of Emily Dickinson, edited by Mabel Todd herself, was published in 1894, 10 years after her death, again to financial success. 1899, Lavinia dies, and honestly, much of the next 20 years of publication of Emily Dickinson's work stems from Mabel Lewis Todd and Thomas Wentworth Higginson's original publications, right? It wasn't until 1914 did a member of the Dickinson family publish a book of her poetry, this being her niece, Martha Dickinson, eventually Bianchi, and the collection was just called The Single Hound Poems of a Lifetime. Between the years of 1914 to 1945, there were nearly a dozen new editions of her poetry, either containing previously unpublished poems or heavily edited versions of them. In fact, it wasn't until 1955 when a man named Thomas H. Johnson rediscovered Emily's original works. He published the Poems of Emily Dickinson that year, which is the first complete collection of her poetry that is free from editorial revisions and contains poems from both separations. This publication, 60 years after her death, also renewed Emily's importance to American poetry. Now, this means that all 4th graders have to read a poem called A Bird Came Down the Walk, and he did not know what I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw, which introduced them to a poetry that permanently scarred them. But I remember that poem. I pointed that one out intentionally.
A bird eating a worm?
Yeah. It's cutting it in half. It's again, not all her poems are spiritual. Some of them are very basic. Emily Dickinson's house, the homestead, was designated finally a National Historic Landmark in 1963, and then Amherst College purchased it 2 years later to open up the Emily Dickinson Museum. In 1977, And ever since then, the state of Massachusetts has designated the homestead, the Evergreens, and the surrounding properties as the Emily Dickinson Historic District. To wrap up today's podcast, I would recite arguably her most famous poem, after doing plugs and sources, of course, but I recently finished her collected poems, and my reaction simply is that her poems do have some complexity to it, some of them, but a lot of them just gets lost to how simple it is, and the syntax doesn't always help her out. I feel like many people cannot appreciate the poems because of how of them are so simple, and the simplicity doesn't make people understand why she would write about like things like flowers or a walk, for instance. But I also think that's very valid. I think it's great to have a simple poem to just read and enjoy. There's some things in life aren't meant to be complicated. That doesn't mean that she didn't write complicated shit. We're going to literally read one of the greatest poems that an American poet has ever had. To me, like, if Emily Dickinson's works was condensed to like a greatest hit album, it would be a banger of an album, similar to how I felt like many 80s rock artists were, right? Like, That's just kind of how it is. I fully understand why her works are taught in school. You kind of have to read it to get a grasp about American poesy tradition. And that's my 2 cents after an hour and 15 minutes. Any questions?
No. With the simplicity of her poems, I'm a kind of a simple guy myself, and sometimes simple it's easier, and there's beauty in the simple things. Sometimes life isn't all that crazy, you know.
And it doesn't need to be.
No, it doesn't. A walk is great. Flowers are great.
So sources are the collected poems of Emily Dickinson, Barnes & Noble's Classics Edition, with the introduction and notes by Rachel Sorry, that's a tough word to pronounce. Much of this info came from the Emily Dickinson Museum's library's website, Poetry Foundation's article around here, and some wiki articles to wrap things up about the history of D.C., Puritan migration to England, to New England, charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Emily Dickinson, Edward Dickinson, and Nathaniel Dickinson. And I'm going to plug my Patreon. That's Lost in the Library Podcast on patreon.com. Also, any questions, please send them to lostinthelibrarypodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram. Again, Lost in the Library there. Substack is my name, at Fil Deptula, and this is currently all under development. The intro song is by a band called Fertile Soil that I once sang for. We're dropping an album in like 3 weeks, which I'm pretty excited about too.
Rock on, brother.
Yeah, it's called Let's Be Honest, This Is Good Enough. It started in 2019, 6 years later, buddy. The pandemic has not been kind to time. So any other last thoughts before I recite this poem and conclude?
No, thanks. Thanks for teaching me so much, and it's been awesome.
Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children played at wrestling in a ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice but a mound. Since then, 'tis centuries, but each feels shorter than a day. I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. Thanks, Noah. Have a good one.
Thanks, Phil.